My guest is laughing. I'm laughing. How could we not? Come on, David. I want to give you props and show some respect to the motherland.
That's terrific. You made me feel so welcome. I tell you, Michael, I can't help thinking God Save the Queen when I hear it, but I must say God Save the King. So
yes, that's right. That's right. I would have said we're playing God Save the Queen. David Charter is the U.S. editor of the Times of London. He's just published a terrific book. It's called Royal Audience, 70 Years, 13 Presidents, One Queen's Special Relationship with America. I got a kick out of the fact that you grew up in the UK and did not understand how highly we Americans have always regarded her until you relocated to the States in, I think, 2017 or 2018.
That's absolutely right, Michael. I mean, it really did take moving here because, of course, when you're a Brit in America, the first question that you tend to get asked is about the royal family. And of course, it always used to be about the Queen, usually. I mean, since she's passed on, we've had a lot more to talk about her. We could maybe talk about that. It's rather exposed some of the other members of the royal family, I think. But even now, if you look at opinion polls and Americans are asked, who's your favorite member of the royal family? It's going to be Queen Elizabeth II and Diana, sadly, two deceased members who are far and away listed as the favorite members of the family.
David, I'm not going to lie. I enjoyed the whole book, but when it first landed in my hands, I went right to the index, wanted to identify where are the Trump pages, because what I most wanted to know is what did she think of him? What's the short answer to that question?
The short answer is that the Queen is a consummate professional diplomat. And what she thought professionally was what she thought of every US president, which is, this is my most valuable ally, and I am going to do everything and use everything in my power to make this person feel like the most special person that I've ever met. And that's what she did, Michael. She used all of her 70 years of experience to make Trump and the 7 other Trumps who came with him to the on the state visit to feel the most welcome people in the room. And I have to say, given all of the chaos that often surrounded Trump overseas visits, the British state visit went off to the book, really. I'm not talking about the earlier visit,
right,
which was the more informal in 2018, when there was this muddle we could talk about inspecting the troops, where Trump and the Queen got into a bit of a tangle, and there was a lot of media about Trump walking in front of the Queen. But my research showed, talking to the palace, a quite important point, which was that Prince Philip, who was still alive at the time, had recently retired from doing the troop inspection. And so the Queen stepped in, and she'd never done it before with an American president. It was always Philip who escorted them to the troops, and she didn't really know what she was doing either. So we would say it was 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. That they were both in a little bit of a tangle when they got to the troops, and it didn't look great for Trump standing momentarily in front of the Queen. But the palace was absolutely mortified, because the main thing that the Queen does is try to make everything go smoothly, and she doesn't want any gaffes at all, and she felt that she was partly to blame for that.
He's such a disruptive force, and yet, as I learned from your book, the book, by the way, Royal Audience, is that when it came to the state visit, and we can discuss this, not every American president gets a state visit, but when it came to his state visit, he played by her rules. And like all of his brethren, all of his predecessors, you and I can wonder what she thought of him and the others. But what seems crystal clear from reading your book is that all of our presidents have loved her, have revered her, and desperately wanted to be in her company.
Yes, that's true for all of the presidents of her reign, with one exception, Michael. As you may know from the book, LBJ did not meet the Queen. That was the only one of the 14 presidents during her reign that he didn't meet. And it was really unfortunate and accidental, because when it was JFK's funeral, she would have gone to the funeral of a deceased fellow head of state. like at JFK, but she was too heavily pregnant. Her doctors stopped her from going, so she couldn't go. She couldn't even go to the memorial service in London, and had a private one at Windsor for some American troops. But and it was very unfortunate when Churchill died. LBJ wanted to come over, but he got an infection at his inauguration. He got I don't know if you recall, well, if you know this, but he got a bad throat infection that developed into something worse on his chest, and his doctors banned him from traveling to London to go to that. So they definitely would have met in more favorable circumstances. But you're absolutely right. It shines through with all of the others, whether the meetings were a little awkward or not. They were really overjoyed and delighted to meet the Queen. That was the special touch that she had.
You mentioned, you made reference to there having been an initial visit with President Trump and the Queen, not the state visit. This was the time that Trump arrives, I think, at Stansted, and she that day is wearing, what's the proper way I should say it? A brooch or a brooch?
A brooch.
A
correct.
brooch.
Yes, a brooch.
And you say in the book, nothing happens by accident, including the way she dressed that day. What am I talking about?
So this was a curious incident because the Queen doesn't usually even give a little clue to what she's really thinking. But there was one here, Michael, because when the Obamas had visited for the first time in 2009, they'd given a brooch to the Queen. It was a little gift that Michelle Obama had bought in a jewelry shop in Washington, D.C. It was very distinctive little green brooch, but it wasn't really the Queen's style. She wore it for their dinner that they had, and then it was never seen again. However, on the morning that Trump arrived in 2018, the Queen had a couple of guests at the palace. It was just before he'd got to the palace. Actually, it was the guests before him, and there was this distinctive little green brooch on her dress, and that, of course, set a lot of hairs running about what is the Queen trying to say by wearing this little memento from the Obamas. Is it somehow suggesting that Obama is more of her favorites? We don't know, and I can't say, but certainly royal watchers that I spoke to, and especially ones who are there are websites devoted to her jewelry, as you may know, they raise it as an issue that certainly raised eyebrows. It was not something that was seen in any other situation quite like that.
David, clearly though, there was a special bond between the Obamas and Queen Elizabeth. Amazing, by the way, because as you discuss in the book, his paternal grandfather had been imprisoned by the British during the fight for Kenyan independence. And the reason I think that we know that it was so special is because of Michelle Obama making a return visit with her mother and the girls, and them being treated royally, pun intended, including the carriage ride around Buckingham Palace and so forth. I mean, that was really highly unusual, right?
It was actually. It was a special touch. And I go on to say in the conclusion of the book that the standout favorite presidents, and I should emphasize again that the Queen regarded it as her mission from the days of Churchill, her first prime minister, to keep the Americans close and to make all the presidents feel special, to develop and deepen the relationship. But it really showed right from the start, from that moment, you may recall, in an informal gathering where Michelle Obama put her arm around the Queen, and instead of some international incident, which there usually is when the Queen is touched in an uninvited way, she put her arm back immediately. So there was this mutual cuddle, which was taken as a sign that the Obamas were getting along famously, of course, with the Queen, which they were. And just a few months later, Michelle Obama was passing through London, and the palace got wind of this and said, well, you must come over. She had the daughters with them. One of the daughters had their birthday that weekend, and the Queen laid on a special carriage ride around the grounds of Buckingham Palace, all privately. There was no photographs, no fuss. But President Obama later revealed it in a press conference briefly that she had shown this kindness. But what I was going to say about the standout presidents always had a relationship that went beyond the standard diplomatic big dinner, big state visit or whatever. They exchanged letters. Their children were invited to meet the royals, or in the case of Eisenhower, who was possibly her absolute favorite president, the Queen Mother went to stay at the White House on her own. She was a big favorite of the Eisenhowers.
And I learned from you, only Eisenhower, correct me if I'm wrong, got the Balmoral invitation.
Absolutely. This really is the pinnacle of royal acceptance, to go to Balmoral, where the Queen spends the summer. It's her summer holiday retreat, and it's a private family place where very few, even British high society, would ever get invited. She was actually pregnant at the time, one of her pregnancies, and she was spending a lot of time at Balmoral. But it was a visit that Eisenhower came over to see the British Prime Minister, and she said, "Well, you must come up and stay, of course." And up goes Eisenhower, who, by the way, Michael, had been given a castle in Scotland by the people of Scotland for his service in the Second World War. So he also went to visit his own castle, and stayed the night. I went to church with the royals and had a picnic.
I love it. By the way, this is David Charter. The book is called Royal Audience. Just one more about the Obamas, because I loved this anecdote. When the Duke of Edinburgh is 94 years old, the Obamas, I guess this was the final visit that they would make, and there's a little bit of jockeying to get into the Range Rover. What am I making reference to?
Oh, yeah, this was Obama wanted to come over at the end of his presidency to wish the Queen a happy 90th birthday, actually. And they landed at Windsor Castle, and up drives Philip in the Range Rover to drive them over from the helicopter to the castle. And protocol would be very much that the two heads of state, President Obama and Queen Elizabeth, would sit together in the back of the Land Rover. But the Queen wanted to sit with Michelle Obama. She had this bond with her. They talked about how their shoes hurt and put their arms around each other, of course, at that gathering we talked about. And so she yanked Michelle Obama into the back of the Land Rover and said to her, "Oh, did they tell you had to sit in the front? Oh, don't worry about that. That's that you don't need to bother about that sort of thing." And so certainly towards the end of her reign, I'm not going to claim she did this throughout, because she was quite starchy during the early years, I think, but she relaxed a lot, and especially with her American guests. She wanted to make them feel at home, and she enjoyed the company of her American guests, all of them, I would say.
Your line in the book was that Her Majesty had said, "Oh, did they tell you there's a rule for that?" That's rubbish, which I just loved. And by the way, I also love the idea of President Obama riding shotgun, as we would say, with no Secret Service in the vehicle, and you've got what did I say? He was 92 or 94-year-old who's driving the Range Rover. I thought that was priceless. I have to get to President Biden, though. President Biden's mother, wholly Irish by his own description, says, "Joey, never bow for the Queen," and she says, or for the Pope, for that matter. Speak to me about President Biden and his relationship with Queen Elizabeth.
So this was another president where a lot was written about and a lot was speculated about how he's very pro-Irish. He doesn't like the British royal family. His mother famously stayed the night in a hotel where she thought the Queen had spent the night, and so she, according to Biden, this is a story he tells, that his mother spent the night on the floor rather than sleeping in the bed. So there was expectation that it would be frosty between them, but not a bit of it. And I think this is partly because Biden's Irish republicanism is a little overdone. He going back, of course, he very much supported the British cause during the Falklands War in the 1980s, when he was urging the Reagan administration to provide more help. Actually, it was secretly, but he didn't know that at the time. So all the way through Biden's career, he has had this sort of slight love-hate relationship with Britain. So there was nervousness in Britain about it, and the Queen very much put him at his ease. And you may remember, well, first of all, he was the only one who went to the G7 in Cornwall in 2021 to get a personal invite to Windsor Castle. Again, showing the special attention that's always lavished by the British royals on the American heads of state. But you may remember he emerged from it, and what did he say? She reminds me of my mother.
Right.
And that's a compliment.
Right. And throughout the course of the book, you do talk about the way in which every interaction, every in-person interaction is scrutinized to see whether there's going to be a breach of protocol, whether it's Michelle Obama with the hand to the back or getting into the back of the Range Rover. With regard to Biden, what I remember and what you write about in the book is the Aviators. His sort of trademark sunglasses also became a subject of, is that appropriate?
Yes, as you say, the public aspect of every visit is a very small portion of it, of course, but it's absolutely poured over, much like a recent photograph issued by the royal family. But we'll gloss over that. It's absolutely poured over for anything slightly out of place. And with Trump and the Queen, it was the muddle where he walked in front of her briefly. With Biden and the Queen, it was keeping the aviators on, which was seen as disrespectful by some of the British media. But the British media are on high alert for disrespect to the Queen. I firmly believe it's rather overdone, and has been throughout, because from the moment Nancy Reagan first arrived and didn't refuse to bow or curtsy to the Queen, but gave a slight nod of the head. This was a cause of tabloid outrage for days in Britain. But of course, there's no necessity at all for an American who's not a subject of the Queen to make any kind of gesture of bowing or curtsying or anything. And the Queen, of course, this is what I keep coming back to. She absolutely wanted the visits, the diplomacy to go smoothly, and she would go along with the behavior pretty much of her visitors, because she knew that they were desperate and to be on their best behavior and not to be caught out. That was a really big point with her, that she didn't want her guests to be embarrassed. That would have been bad diplomacy, and a prime, our country's leading diplomat doesn't want an embarrassing situation. She wants it to go. She wants to go well.
A quick final question. I hope you can tell from my tone and my questions how thoroughly I enjoyed this book. It's called Royal Audience. David Charter is the author. So it was Churchill who used the words special relationship. I need to hear 60 seconds from you about, it's almost comedic how the bust gets moved into the Oval Office, out of the Oval Office, back into the Oval Office. Say something about that.
It's another symbol that's seen by the press mainly, but I think it is these symbolic items do have great meaning and significance at the start of a presidency. So when Obama removed the bust of Churchill that George W. Bush had in the Oval Office, it was seen as a confirmation that he wasn't that interested in the UK, perhaps in Europe at all, and that everything we'd been hearing about him reorientating America's foreign policy interest to the Pacific was correct. And then, of course, he invited the Japanese Prime Minister as the first visitor to the Oval Office, with no bust of Churchill in it. Of course, the alarm bells rang even louder. Gordon Brown was our Prime Minister at the time. He did get there second after the Japanese Prime Minister. But what was it that the Brits did to get Obama, to woo Obama, if you like? It was a special visit with the Queen. He came over to the G20. He was the only one of the 20 leaders invited in London to get a lunch with the Queen. And that's when the relationship began. Diplomats I've spoken to in Britain say it had a noticeably positive impact on Obama's view of Britain and his attitude towards the country
David
and the
Charter.
relationship. So that's how it works.
The book is Royal Audience. Cheers, my friend. It's a great read. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. God bless.